This week, Vicarius' very own Roy Cohen and Gilad Lev join us to kick off the show with a technical segment titled From Chaos to Topia. Jeff Capone from Secure Circle joins us for an interview on zero trust data security. In the security news, thousands of unsecured medical records were exposed online. Advanced persistent threat actors target U.S. think tanks. War games for real. How one 1983 exercise nearly triggered World War III. The Supreme Court will hear its first big CFAA case. TrickBot feature allows TrickBot to run UEFI attacks. And Cyber Command deployed personnel to Estonia to protect elections from the Russian threat. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Sophisticated attackers are targeting credentials to escalate privileges. Ativo Networks provides an innovative solution that finds, cleans, and monitors exposed credentials to reduce attack surfaces. Additionally, the solution alerts when attackers try accessing Active Directory objects while hiding data and derailing them with disinformation. Organizations can go one step further and hide real credentials among deceptive lures that lead attackers to decoys for recording TTPs and forensic evidence. Find out more at securityweekly.com/Ativo Networks and sign up for a free trial.
Hey, and welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man. When he wears his mask because of COVID-19 rules, he's often accompanied by the phrase of "Bring out the GIMP," Mr. Paul Asadori.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 676, recorded on December 3rd, 2020, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, none other than the doctor. It's Dr. Doug White.
I is here.
A.K.A. the Plague.
Yeah. The Plague.
I love your t-shirt. And I thank you for your t-shirt. This is in reference to a recent Paul's Security Weekly episode where we quoted an article that said, sometimes the computer just freaks out. Now I have the t-shirt to prove
That's
it.
right. He has the t-shirt to prove it.
That
really did exist.
It's awesome. Yeah. And I love your t-shirt too.
I like it.
For those listening on audio, it says, long story, sin ac fin.
Wonderful. Microphone.
Long story short, Synac Fin.
Long story short, yeah, what did I say? Long story short. It wouldn't have been a very good joke if it was just long story.
My whole collection of weird network protocol shirts is coming soon from Armani.
It's a true nerd stature. I have a collection of network protocol funny shirts.
We have a line of colognes coming out too. It's like ACK. When you want them to remember.
You should just call it sin.
Yeah. Sin.
Sin. It's just it's really funny.
Sin.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome. Rocking his Christmas sweater.
Good to be here. Got to break out the first Christmas sweater of the season. It's time. And going to have some fun tonight.
Absolutely. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
I thought it was just Groundhog Day. What holiday are we talking about?
Christmas.
Christmas. Oh, my
Yes,
God.
Christmas.
Well, merry and a happy to everyone.
It is Christmas time. Mr. Larry Pesci is here with us. Larry, welcome.
Hell yeah. And I'm saving my Christmas sweater for next week.
It's
going to be special.
I wore mine on Monday, so.
You only have one?
No, well, my Wu-Tang one I wore on Monday, and I dropped the ball. I wanted to wear this t-shirt tonight. Wardrobe is very important here at Paul Security Weekly.
It is.
Joff Dyer is here with us. Joff, welcome.
Who? Me? Oh,
Yes.
hello. How's everybody? It's good to see everybody. Great on a Thursday night again. Oh my God, it's Thursday. I've had a really good day. It's just good to be here.
I also think the best dressed host is Mr. Tyler Robinson. It's always snazzy, and he's got the hair to back it up. So
Yeah.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Well, and he's got
You
hair.
And he has
gotta
hair.
dress how you want to get paid.
he's
That's
actually
what it is.
got hair.
What was that, Tyler? Dress how you
got a
want
lot
to
of
get
hair.
dress how you want to get paid. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Isn't that how that works? I don't know.
You're the.
Man,
did-
I'm surprised you're not wearing like a thong and like pasties then. Like
are you? I want to get paid in small bills that are put in. Yes.
unmarked small bills.
Unmarked small bills. Tyler, are you in the basement? Is that what it looks dark?
It is very dark here because I'm trying to wire in some damn smart lights, and let me tell you, knob and tube and smart lights don't go together.
Wow. All
I
right.
think you needed to do the knob and tube replacement project first.
I started that.
Excellent. Quick announcement, Security Weekly in partnership with the Cyber Risk Alliance is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. The inaugural event of Security Weekly Unlocked also celebrates Security Weekly's 15-year anniversary and will feature talks from Ron and Cindy Gula, Kevin Finisterre, Vivek Ramachandran, panel discussions on API security, social engineering, and diversity, as well as so much more. Contests. We'll be giving away limited edition challenge coins. There'll be a Discord hangout. Hopefully we can all actually talk to each other on the Discord hangout as well, which is a lot of fun. The agenda is live at securityweekly.com/unlocked. You can register for free. All you have to do is register, and you can attend this event on December 10th. Make sure you do that, securityweekly.com/unlocked. This segment is sponsored by Vicarius. Visit securityweekly.com/Vicarius to learn more. Joining us today from Vicarius, Roy Cohen and Gilad Lev. Welcome, guys. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having us. Hey,
Now-
Paul. Great to be here.
Nice to have you both. Now, Roy, you've been on the show a few times in the past. Gilad is an IT professional and the graduate of an elite technology unit. No stranger. Oh, okay. That was your whole introduction, Gilad. So welcome to the show for the first time.
Thanks a lot.
I apologize. We didn't have something more spectacular to say in our introduction. I was hoping for more, but you will dazzle us during this segment. We're talking about chaos to Topia, and it was going to be chaos to utopia, but your product is called Topia. So, my guys, we should call it from chaos to Topia because Topia helps us identify all your assets and do asset discovery, especially with the software installed on your systems. It helps you do patching, patch management, as well as patchless protection. And so I'll turn it over to Roy and Gilad to kind of further set the stage.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. We want to do like a quick recap before we dwell into Chaos Utopia. So on the previous sessions, we kind of discussed about the sheer amount of vulnerabilities that bombard us, and we discussed with Shani about how we can also, aside of the known vulnerabilities, how new technologies allow us to predict what would be in potential compromise in the future. Afterwards, we had a session with David about the fact that aside of patching what security teams and also IT can do in order to better defend themselves against exploits, we talked about new techniques like memory protection and additional capabilities. And we kind of dwelled far into the prioritization part where we discussed about how we should add context and color vulnerabilities in the context of a company in order for better focus on the issues that matter. And for today, we kind of wanted to wrap everything up and discuss about the process of how vulnerability management should be done, given the fact there are new techniques, new technologies, also new threats. Eventually, vulnerability is going to disclose in a growing matter on a daily or monthly basis. So this is kind of the theme we want to set up for today's session.
I just want to, you've done a few segments with us, and we've talked a lot about vulnerability prioritization and management, especially in the past few months. I just think it's pretty amazing what you folks have built because it dives right into the issue of looking on every computer system that you know about with an agent and taking an inventory. I think that's a really important step because it allows you to make better decisions. You also take into account some of the external factors as well. The severity of the vulnerabilities, whether there's an exploit that exists. And then you go the extra length, which was interesting, Roy, because you told me this was the feature you actually built first. You go through the extra length to say, well, we're going to allow you to have this patchless technology. And, oh, by the way, we're going to look at what other parts of the code might also be potentially vulnerable to some kind of zero-day exploit. And we're going to protect those too. So I think what you built really shines in all of those areas. And I really get it now and really appreciate it, even more so than when we first met. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. And this is exactly what we're trying to build here. Eventually, the story of remedying vulnerabilities effectively goes through the path of, you need to know you have an issue, you need to identify the vulnerabilities. Then once you know that, you need to really focus on the ones, that really put your company into a greater risk and build a plan. And without further ado, I would like Gilad to really dwell into this topic and discuss furthermore. So Gilad, the floor is yours.
Sure. So we do talk to a lot of security professionals about the best way to manage vulnerabilities. And it seems to not quite change through the last 25 years, ever since the first vulnerabilities have been found in software. And when you read the NIST framework and you look for the guidelines and the steps that one should take in order to remediate vulnerabilities, you see that it consists of assessment, of finding all the vulnerabilities, digesting them, and later on finding the remediation for each and every vulnerability. And it doesn't take into account the new technologies that came that might provide you with better capabilities to address this issue much more quickly. So what I mean by that is that you have these emerging technologies which allow you for continuous remediation, for instance. And the old-fashioned frameworks want you to do this assessment, for instance, on a periodic basis, which leave you a bit vulnerable, in the time between the assessments. So there are some areas where these frameworks lack, where we find that it is worth bringing up a new methodology to this space that would allow an alternative for organizations, because we hear from a lot of organizations that, they have great tools, the tools are getting better and better, they cover more vulnerabilities, they allow them to manage things better, but they don't know how to approach this. You see, you can have all the tools in the world, but if you don't have the right steps and the high-level understanding of how to manage the vulnerabilities and what should be the goal at the end of the day, then it seems rather pointless having all these tools. So,
Gilad, it's interesting to speak to that point. I did. Was on a webcast this week and just thinking about vulnerability management, and I'm like, well, what happens if I Google image search vulnerability management? And I kind of encourage everyone to do this because I thought it was interesting. It led to me creating a slide. Everyone's got their different kind of style of how they would depict it. It starts with discovery, it goes to scanning, it goes to, some people have validation or verification in there, some people jump right to prioritization, then they jump to remediation, and then you should repeat the steps. And if you Google image search it, you can find 30, 40, 100 or so images that are basically variations on the same theme. I'm like, you can display that graphic all you want, but the hard part is in all those different points on the circle graph or flow chart or however you're displaying it. Like, all that stuff's really hard. What we should be talking about is how to actually do all that stuff.
It's based on the scientific method. I mean, that's where that comes from, and the scientific method's the same way. It's like, scanning. Okay, find a problem to solve. It's like, solve it. Okay, you're done. Or repeat until it's solved. It's like, it sounds easy.
Like, that's not really helping.
Sure, but you see this circle, and then what does it come down to? You see this very nice circle. This
Gilad, we called it the circle of pain. That's what it was nicknamed. The circle of pain.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, for instance, if we have this circle, this loop, how long do you think that from the moment a vulnerability was discovered until it's remediated, it should take?
It depends on, and I've read some of this data recently, and it depends on which operating system that you're talking about. And the average, I want to say across Microsoft systems was 3 months, Linux systems were 6 months, and devices like IoT and routers and stuff were 8+ months on average for some kind of, given data set or whatever, for some of the numbers I was reading this week.
So those are the numbers for remediation. And don't you think these are exploited much earlier than this? I mean, really, you have all these vulnerabilities out there. Attackers have automated tools for actually finding these vulnerabilities and exploiting them. What they get much more quickly than 8 months until the organizations get to remediate them. So if we take like an average organization that consists of thousands of computers, do you think it's reasonable using the old frameworks, like a month until all the vulnerabilities should be remediated? I mean, by the time all the vulnerabilities are remediated according to the SLAs, the old-fashioned SLAs that don't take into considerations the risk level of the vulnerabilities, but more take into account the amount of vulnerabilities that exist and how many of them should be patched. You see, so this kind of SLA doesn't meet the requirements of today's growing amount of vulnerabilities and available exploits out there. It's much easier to get your hands on exploits that can actually allow some hackers potentially get in the organization.
Well, and the other interesting thing, Gilad, when you think about that kind of paradigm is that zero-day exploits exist whether we know about them or not. So you can do vulnerability management all you want and focus it on patching, only on patching, even configuration management. But if someone's got a zero-day exploit, that's likely still going to be successful. The other thing is, I don't really believe there's an organization out there that can say definitively for any, especially longer time frame, that they've patched everything, which means there's always going to be a vulnerability in one of your systems or applications out there at any given time. And you better just hope that it's ones that have a low likelihood of being exploited or having an exploit created and have a really low impact. And that's, to me, what it really kind of boils down to in vulnerability management is fixing the things that matter and fixing them fast. Kind of the back of your point.
What do you think that doesn't allow us, prevents us from actually closing the loop much faster? I mean, you have this process. So let's look at it from end to end. You start off by finding the vulnerabilities. Then the security professional gets a nice list of vulnerabilities. And then he needs to digest these vulnerabilities to find the relevant remediation for these vulnerabilities. That's a stage where he has to take that report that is rendered, that has all the details, but it's a very long report, and send it over to the IT guys for further treatment. Don't you think this might be some systemic issue there?
Yeah, I think the process is slow, and I also think that what slows us down or prevents us from installing the patch is the operational risk. The patch could cause more harm than good in that particular scenario.
That and sometimes it's just process problems. I mean, a lot of people adopted like these kind of procedures from old mainframe procedures, which involve people signing off on dev prod and all these kind of things, and they want to go through that same process, and it just takes so long to get a review done.
And also, I think from the application standpoint, I don't know the best way to phrase it, but for example, when I was developing our PBWorks application, like, yep, that's a vulnerability. I know that's an issue. Whether it was, Git or one of our CI/CD tools going, this library is out of date. I'm like, yep, I know that. I can update it. However, that's X amount of time or work, or even some unknown amount. And just knowing the code, I'm like, I could tell like stuff that had a higher probability of being easy versus really difficult. And I'm like, that's going to have to wait. I got to go through a couple other cycles because I got to squash these bugs. I got to implement some features. Then I can come back around and go update that library and see what's broken and fix it. And I don't know if that's not operational risk. That's priority of bugs and features over security risk. Basically.
I mean, it's all part of the risk spectrum.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
so it's acceptance of risk on a certain level because you know, the likelihood of something happening.
But operational risk is I don't want to update that library because it has the potential to crash my application versus it's going to take me a long time to fix it in regression tests and make sure I got it right. Those to me are two different. In my mind, those are two different things. I'm just not explaining as well as
I think I agree with that.
I hope it's not a common thing. I hope it's not a common thing, but we once spoke with this client, and well, it was a rather bigger kind of an organization, and we spoke with the person who is in charge of the vulnerability scanning, and he told us, yeah, so I find the issues and then deliver to the IT, and he says, oh, all done, I fixed it, because he knows that to do the full scan for the company takes like 2-3 months, so the next time it's going to bother him, you know, for the validation part is going to take probably a few extra months, so he's like, oh, I'm done, leave me with it, I have an extra mileage up until I can fix that. I hope it's not a common thing, though.
Yeah. But that's why I'm a fan of having an agent on those systems, so I don't like going through that whole scan process, God, as you were referring to. That process just takes way too long.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I can show you. It's like this very long process, and it takes a lot of time just going through this. So let me just show you how it can look like for an organization that's not of that big of a size, yet you may find a lot of vulnerabilities within it, just for the mere fact that applications nowadays have a lot of vulnerabilities within them. And we discover more and more of this. So just a moment. So here we see an organization that we have 10 computers. So just about 10 computers, you see, this bank organization. But we have been able to find as many as 2,800 vulnerabilities in that organization. And I'm speaking of only the reported ones, you see. So now just for these 10 computers, we have to tell the IT guys and the security guys to go through this very long report. You see here we have this long report. And, you know, they have to go through every one of these vulnerabilities. Let's take only, you know what, the high risk and the critical vulnerabilities. So we take just these two. So we get as many as around 2,000 vulnerabilities. So now they have to ask themselves, okay, which vulnerabilities are the ones that I should treat first? So they would say, okay, I want the highest risk, or no, maybe I want the ones that are the latest. They're not sure. So they have to take a lot of information into account. So let's say they've decided they want to go with the highest risk. Good. So they go with the high risk. Now that they've decided to go with the high risk, they have to go through every one of these vulnerabilities. And it's not just seeing the remediation right from here. This means that they have to actually enter the vulnerability, specifically this one vulnerability. Now they have to go through, okay, so this specific vulnerability does the following. And not only that, they have to go through the resources and now try to find the fix and the changes in configuration that they have to make for that particular vulnerability. So they have to go on the website of the vendor and find there what they should do about it. So this process is rather complex, and I believe you, Paul, saw that in other products as well, where you get this long list of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, worked in that space, right? Used a lot of those tools. I mean, I've used most of the vulnerability scanners, on the market, commercial or open source. And they do a great job at discovering all the vulnerabilities in some very unique ways. I mean, because let's face it, there's I'm going to go check for this vulnerability. It's well known. It's got a CVE. It's got a patch, right? It's been recognized by the vendor. And I think what a lot of kind of concerns me, or not concerns me, but, makes me upset about the perception of vulnerability scanners is that there's a lot of other cool stuff in there that's finding conditions in your network that don't necessarily have a CVE. Now, this problem is still a problem even if you just look at CVE. The whole thing is, how do you measure what's not a CVE? How do you measure how much of that you have in your network if you can find it or not? But finding it or not is something that's difficult to measure because it doesn't tie back to a CVE. And So you're finding all the CVE stuff. You're finding some percentage of the stuff that doesn't have a CVE. And then you get the big giant report. I hand it to Doug and be like, hey, I found all the stuff that's wrong in your systems. You can go fix it now. And then let me know when like you're done with all of that so that I can go back and I can go run that scan again. And instead of a 2,000 page report, now I've got a 1,000 page report. And it takes 3 months every time we go through this cycle.
I've been through that myself.
Yeah.
Painting a bridge.
So they get you.
Can you tweak the prioritization in this so that I can cause things to be flagged as critical, rather than it just, I'm not sure how that's being determined, if it's just from the CVE scores or the CVSS scores or whatever, or are you using some other algorithm to determine how those things are actually prioritized?
Great question.
So sure. As a matter of fact, we use these parameters here. They are called X tags in order to evaluate applications' risk levels. So the information, like Paul mentioned, regarding the networking and all of this information doesn't really help you at the end of the day because it just gives you more work. They tell you, okay, so we found more information, and based on that information, you're more vulnerable. Go ahead and fix stuff. So that's not what we aim to do here. What we aim to do is to take the amount of vulnerabilities that you get right from here. So it's here, these 2,800 vulnerabilities, and based on various indicators, sources of data that include internal sources of data, namely the information that's collected from the endpoints. That includes the network activity, the applications activity, and the permissions with which the application runs. We take such information from the asset itself and from the vulnerabilities, so the CVSS score, and from external sources such as exploits databases, to give us a comprehensive amount of information that covers all the aspects of the vulnerability to get us better insights to the risk levels of the vulnerabilities. So we take all these different pieces of information and we combine them in such a way to ultimately reduce it to very few applications that you actually need to remediate. So Paul said at the beginning of the conversation about a situation where you have some vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities go unpatched. So what we say is, in the case where these vulnerabilities are not high-risk vulnerabilities, in a large organization where they have thousands of vulnerabilities, it might not be an issue. Maybe if there is, let's say, a server that runs an application, not runs an application, has an application, and that application has a vulnerability. That vulnerability might be of high risk, but if that application never seems to run on that server and we are able to detect that, maybe it's worth fixing other vulnerabilities first before we get to that specific application that never seems to run on that server. And such kind of insights you can only gain by actually monitoring the activity specifically on that endpoint. So to your question, we do use our own algorithm to assess using these various pieces of information, the risk levels of the applications on the assets in the organization. So based on all these different pieces of information, whether it is the CVSS core, whether it is like an exploit that exists for a specific vulnerability, we're able to actually get the application's risk level. So we see here at the application's risk level, and we want to look a bit more into the application to understand why it has this risk level. So we can see here the exact data that was being collected for that specific application in that specific version. So we can see it right for instance, that this application happens to have a vulnerability that's associated with this. And we can also see that in terms of the process, what we want to achieve is, in terms of the vulnerability management process, we want to first see all the applications. We want to see the inventory. We then want to see all the vulnerabilities, whether they are known vulnerabilities, which are CVEs, whether these are some unknown vulnerabilities, some vulnerabilities which are found in the software based on past patterns of vulnerabilities in other software. So you want to see that. You want to have the coverage. You do want to not have false positives that some scanners may have. So you do want to have all this, but you also want to reduce the amount of vulnerabilities that you actually need to remediate. So in the process of managing it, you want to continuously find new vulnerabilities in the software as the software is being installed, and not just in the time frame when the assessment takes place. And then you want to be able to get a score of that vulnerability as quickly as possible in order to have it remediated. And that leads us to the remediation. So on that case of this application, what we can see is that we do have a remediation for that particular application. And that is a touchy subject, specifically in this field, because the question is, and I want you guys' opinion on this. I mean, we should actually conduct the patching, because is it a security thing or is it an IT thing?
I think it should.
That's got to be an IT thing, right?
Yeah,
Because
agreed.
they're the asset owners.
I mean, typically, you don't have the. I mean, I've never had the authority to go in and start patching without getting at least getting approval, and I would think IT would be doing that.
Got to get your change request form in, Doug.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your TPS.
Security should verify and validate those particularities after that's done.
Right.
But yeah, I wouldn't want to have to do that.
I see, but on the other end, where you see so many vulnerabilities inside your software, and you as the security guy are aware of it, and you know the exact information about this, would you want to hand it over to someone whose this task is not his main priority?
Well, I mean, I kind of do, because I don't really want to, as a security professional, I don't want to get saddled with trying to ascertain all the implications of me patching an app on a server that affects 10,000 employees that somebody else is going to have to support.
Yeah, let the IT department do it, because they know where the
That's what I
bodies are
mean.
buried.
I'm saying, so the
Right.
IT
it's like me with
people.
the code. Like, I want to be the one to apply the. If it's my code, I should be the one applying the patches, because when it breaks, I know hopefully in my
Right.
code, right? You
And
know,
I mean, that's how programming group worked, because if the, and I'll equate it to QA, but if QA looked at our code and they said there's 2 places in here where somebody can make a horrible mistake, they didn't fix those mistakes. They sent them back to programming and said that needs to be corrected. And then, it
and
would
you
have been.
go, oh crap! There's actually
Sure.
23 places where.
Glad they didn't see all these.
Right.
Yeah, the QA should take over all the process. So, yeah, that's pretty much the way in which it works in all organizations, where you have the separation between the security and the IT. And the question is, how these guys can work better together in order to reduce the time from when the vulnerability is being discovered until it is remediated.
Yep.
And there are a lot of ways to achieve this. One is by using the same system, which allows you to get the end solution to this. So in case that you do see a vulnerability, you can actually have it patched right here. So you basically go and have it downloaded from the vendor's website. So you can choose specific patch for the specific application, and then you can have it applied to the relevant servers in the target organization. So you can choose whether you want to do it today or to do it at such a different time based on your time of convenience. So this is something.
Gilad and Roy, I mean, to that end, what I just want to cut to the chase, right? Because we know that friction is created when security says to IT, you got to apply this patch, and IT goes, no, I don't want to apply this patch. And then you're like, no, you really should apply this patch. And IT says, no, we're really not going to apply this patch. And then you go to your boss and you're like, so we've got ransomware, right? We all know like potentially how it could go down. In your customers that have the ability to do the patchless protection, what's that conversation like? Is it like, hey, IT, you should apply this patch. And they're like, no. And security's like, well, I can give you patchless protection. And IT's like, yeah, that's great. Woohoo. Like, let's do it. Or like, how does that play out?
Yeah, actually, it's a great point where, eventually patching, as we kind of discussed, is the kind of traditionally the domain of the IT. But patches is an interesting story, and we see that for our clients, for example, this is something that the security is more than happy to accept as a countermeasure in the scenarios where you cannot deploy the patch. And this is actually something which contributes to the removing of the friction between the teams, because again, they kind of contradict each other. Security wants to fix everything. IT kind of wants to keep things, running. And the fact that we allow at least reduce the gap or give some period between the patching windows for security, at least to gain some control up until and when. This is something great. And also we will be discussing about the fact we simply reduce the patches that are needed to be applied, because again, not the fact there is a patch doesn't necessarily mean you should do anything about it.
And so, but are IT teams receptive to this patchless technology, or like when you first explain it to them, do they have, like, what's their first question? I would want to know what's their first question if like I go to an IT team and say, well,
of course.
Yeah.
Eventually, like the IT's biggest concern is, like we discussed before, was in regards to operation. It means that they are afraid some functionality may be jeopardized because of these kind of memory tricks we are doing. And this could be a concern. Actually, this is kind of why you see here there is analyzed, monitored, and protected. So for the sake of reducing the friction and reducing the concerns could be raised by IT, we created a mode which allows you just to be transparent. So we are not actively blocking the exploits in memory, just notifying upon. And this really allows them to get, confidence with the fact that we are just, applying the security countermeasures and not changing anything in the terms of the functionality.
Yeah,
we have kind of used this for years.
They need to be eased into it. Yeah, that's a good approach.
How does this work when you're not remediating vulnerabilities and you're taking this approach for things like compliance or for board meetings where you're having to give accounting of what vulnerabilities have been remediated or what vulnerabilities are outstanding within inside of an organization?
Actually, it's a great question, and eventually, I think in terms of compliance and regulations, it's not yet fully adjusted to new technology, patches protection or virtual patching or some other corporate scanning control. Because eventually, when you're going to scan your devices, and you go to the registry or to the disk or whatever technique you're using, and eventually you get a version of an application. And you compare this with a known vulnerability database, for example. So you cannot go around this. Eventually, there is a vulnerability. It doesn't matter all the configuration changes and all the additional countermeasures. So today, in terms of the audits, it's not yet evolved to the point that if you have some complex scanning control, it could be tagged as resolved. Using our system, we can generate a report which shows you what exactly is left open. And this is how we we can help companies in their audits. But again, it's a good point, and it's something that hopefully will be evolved in the future in the sake of regulation and because there are more patches being released and more software releases. So it's something that I guess the market should adapt to at some point.
I had another question, and now I lost it.
Let me ask you. So all this, to make sure I understand this, so all these agents are filtering down at the system level to prevent these things that haven't been patched. Is that something that's going to cause like a lot of bottlenecks and problems as that piles up? Because my suspicion is going to be that as IT says this is cool, we don't have to patch these things, and they're just going to leave them laying there. Does that start piling up?
Yeah, no, they have ASLR, but they still apply the patches, right? And this is, you still have to. Well, maybe not. Never mind.
We
patches
hope
anything.
We hope that the vendor knows like what he's talking about when he codes a patch. So our recommendation is still for the client to install the official patch once he can do so. But
Right.
at least he's now got like this extra time where he can adjust himself and not
Well, test the patch too. I mean, to your point, Roy,
Yeah.
we like to think that the patch isn't going to break stuff, but I mean, who here has applied a patch or an update that's broken something? Like this week, I think we can all
Everybody
probably
raised
still
their
keep our
hand.
hands up, right? So having more time to test the patches and the updates or the fixes or whatever it is to remediate the vulnerability, I think is a huge tool.
Me
in
too.
your
I mean, I
arsenal,
think
right?
it's a great tool. I'm just trying to sort of think through all the things they're going to ask me about tools like this when I start getting
I
asked.
agree. That's what I go through now is kind of that almost like
it's like-
threat modeling, but not about the threat modeling the people that you work with in other groups and what they're going to ask. Right?
Yeah.
But
Threat modeling
there's
the auditors.
There's another point just wanted to add to that. So kind of a thing we noticed with the prioritization part is that, if in the past, and I've witnessed that the security teams like hand over to the IT, okay, they said CV 2020-13-160, the one we discussed a couple of sessions ago, for example, is risky and we must fix it because I told you so, because I'm the security professional, I know what I'm talking about. And it's something that very, the IT, which is not a security professional usually, it has a very hard time to understand and comprehend, okay, why should I care about it? It's just a number out of many numbers you're throwing at me every other week. So I cannot really leverage this or get him into the process. And the fact that we have the tags, which specifically are saying this vulnerability was exploited in the wild, and the properties that we are using as a company, this application actually contribute to the fact it would be rather easy to exploit this application. So, all of the stars in the sky are set for this application to get exploited, and in a very easy and digestible way where IT can really understand that, really contributes to their time to patch. And we see they're actually patching more things because they are a part of the process, because they're all aligned also with the security. So it's not only the patch list which kind of reduce the friction between them, but also the ability for the security to digest the problem and to case that with the IT and tell them why they should do something about it.
So, what about making sure systems are prioritized? As in, you have different you have systems that could be patched because they're commodity systems. They're not running anything. You could click patch and reboot them, and nobody's going to worry. Where you probably don't want that underneath your ERP system. Is that something people are thinking about as well, or is that just something I think about?
No, definitely. This is a topic which is, identifying the critical asset is something that is, first of all, it's a big problem because security not necessarily is a part of, production to some extent. They should be, but we get to clients where, for example, cloud environments, okay? So imagine that the DevOps have the account for example, AWS. They are basically just shooting servers up into the air, and the security is not fast enough to really understand which of these assets are something that, let's put the visibility part aside, because let's say this is resolved, which is not the case for many clients. But let's say this is resolved. Usually security doesn't even know whether a given machine is production. So it's also a big pain, again, we had a few sessions before where we discussed like pen tests. Sometimes it's very hard for a pen tester to really tag the assets which are mission critical, aside of maybe, the best thing you can do, it's like by the name, the DNS name, you can try to assume maybe it's a production machine, but that's kind of about it. So we are tagging information based on activity as well, things that we can assume to be a production or critical machine. Again, it's not perfect like anything, but it's better than
But
nothing.
also too, Lee and Roy and Lee, especially to your point, I think the level of exploitability certainly factors in. Sure, I may have some mission critical SAP servers. Does that mean every time there's a vulnerability of any criticality level, everyone needs to drop everything and patch it? Probably not. Now, Roy, to your point for the pen tester, patch the stuff that is easily exploitable or known to be exploited in your SAP systems. A lot of the other vulnerabilities may or may not matter. You may want to patch the ones that could lead to exploitation, but I think the path of pen tester, especially Larry, Joff, Tyler have described are the way I'm going to get into your ERP system is I'm going to fish a user, social engineer, and get malware on their system. And then I'm going to put maybe a keystroke logger and watch them log into the SAP system, and then it's game over, right? A totally different path, right? Vulnerability management still plays a part in that role, but maybe not in the same way of every critical system we have to apply all of the patches.
And
every critical patch, like every critical vulnerability, I have to apply immediately. I think these extremes really don't apply to
and there's a big
work.
chain there too of there's a vulnerability, but there's also remediation in between that vulnerability and the world. And like Roy was on several times before talking about prioritization of these vulnerabilities, and you may decide the risk isn't worth the return if you start patching some elaborate server and you go, well, we really, we stuck a firewall out there, and that's going to have to do for now. I mean, hopefully this won't happen.
Right.
We can't afford this fix this week or this month. I mean, that's reality.
The other thing I was thinking about with categorizing machines is you can take the number of machines that you have to do more analysis before you patch or update them down to a more manageable set. Let's say we categorize all desktop machines as commodity, and they get the patches every Tuesday regardless. There's no exceptions here. And maybe you have infrastructure servers that are running, they haven't got anything custom. You can just patch them, and then you get down to services that are more complicated, irrespective of location. Then you start getting into the SDLC, the testing, the regression testing, excuse me. But you're not doing that for every single bloody computer in the place anymore. You're down to where it matters. And you're absolutely right. It's non-trivial. I get that. And the exploitability context, if this is behind a heavy-duty firewall that mitigates the risk, or we put some other mitigation in place, we then move on to what else is not so protected. But it's interesting. It's a multi-part problem, right?
Sure. And also it's a big problem because you don't know which computers and which groups are the ones that you care about most. So, how do you guys say, okay, which groups are the most important to me? Which ones have the highest business value in my organization?
All of them?
All of them? I mean,
the critical ones and all the ones that have access to the critical ones.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that asset valuation is a really challenging thing for a lot of organizations too, because they have evolutionary development. So they have had systems that have developed over 40 years, and it's really hard for them if you sit down with them at a table and you say, which is the most important thing that you need to patch right away, which is the least important thing, and it's really tough for them to do. I mean, they can obviously pick the low-hanging fruit and go, oh, well, our main web server that all our customers use is the most important thing.
Right.
But then once it gets beyond that, it's like, is accounting more important than finance? Is more important than production? And there's all these different rankings, and they may not even know what all they have. I mean, again, it's just like when you start
what
talking
about
to these
patching
people.
the router or the switch that's in the path from
that too.
That one? I
They
mean, that
never say that.
Never.
I've never ever had them say the router or the switch was important, and that's a good. I'm going to remember that too, because I'm going to
no
go.
one ever says that.
I'm going to go. Okay, go
unplug
I'll say unplug the router right now. It's obviously not important.
But even the network team doesn't say that because they're like, crap, I don't want to update firmware.
Exactly.
If you've ever had to do that, it's horrible.
Oh,
right?
it's horrible.
It's horrible.
And the routers are buried in a closet somewhere under a bunch of old
only
gear.
way I got teams, like when I worked for the university, to do that, Joff, you can relate to this, was I read up on it and learned as much about networking as I could, and I'm like, I'll help you. And they were like, okay, right? If you're helping, sure. I'm like, I'll take some of that responsibility, guys. I know this sucks. Like, I'll help. Like, we need to update our OSPF configuration. Like, I'll help. I'll test some stuff for you.
Yeah.
And they're like, thank you. That's awesome.
Look, I went one better than that. I actually got them to spend real money, and I had everything so well mapped out redundantly at both layer 3 and layer 2 that I could update any device and take it down and it would not hurt.
It's a great strategy too. If you can get budget for it, it's a great strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you think about something like IPMI, right? And now that's one of the common findings when you're doing a pen test or like complete server ownage, and you're at the same thing. IPMI on a virtual server, you're taking down all of the hosts within inside that virtual server, or if it's physical, it's probably a domain controller. So, how many teams want to do that? And therefore, why is it not getting patched or updated or a password applied or put on a management network? That's why.
Yep. I used
Don't
to do that
touch
when
that.
it was.
You might break it.
Remember, Dell used to call it DRAC.
Yeah.
It's still called Drac.
They do still call it DRAC. Yeah, it's still called
And
ILO for HP.
and I love with DRAC. I found one, and it was default password, and or it could have been vulnerable, right? And this ties into vulnerability management. And you may go, I don't. Ben, back to the subjectivity. I don't really need to patch that. Got in.
It's got a password.
Admin, right? Was the password, or it has a vulnerability, and I'm in, and I'm like, oh, someone's got an already established session to, the actual computer that's running behind this DRAC management device, like in the server. And I'm like, oh, let me just connect to the console, and it was on a Linux or Unix server, and it was already logged in as root. So there I was sitting at a root prompt. Like, we got to apply vulnerability management to all these different, take into account all these different scenarios. And Roy, in Gilad, I think that's why we really need this more advanced tooling coupled with process and teamwork and collaboration to get this done. Because as we pointed out in all these segments, there's like no one right answer if we just live in our little silos and we silo off all these different conversations. Like, really what it comes down to is having awesome tooling that supports a great process with great teamwork. And I think that the pen testers that are sitting with us today could say those are the most difficult organizations
and you've got to free up your specialists. I mean, that's what these tools do for you, because if you got your specialists sitting there all day long chasing down these little things,
right,
you're wasting an awful lot of cycles.
What was the specialist in the Phoenix project and the Unicorn project? What was his name? Was it Derek? I don't remember his name, but that you reminded me of that. Yeah. Sorry, Roy, Gilad. I don't know where we were going with all that. It was fun.
That's my specialty, is distraction.
Oh, check Slack.
Oh, and it's and it's oh my God, it's 7:00. Well, Roy and Gilad, thank you. I was having so much fun. I lost track of time. So, Roy and Gilad, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly this evening. Folks that want to learn more can visit securityweekly.com/Vicarius. Coming up next, Jeff Capone from Secure Circle is coming on. Stick around.